1877, we've built all our buildings, we've got pretty good amount of money coming in every year or every week. It's time to consider something beyond the borders of the USA, international relations. Knowing that we've got both an anti-Russian and an anti-German lobby, because it's now German. It used to be anti-Prussian, now it's German. We've got a pro-British one. We're in the middle period of the game where there's starting to be more collisions in terms of great powers and their ambitions. The first third of the game, nations are building up their economies and are making tentative grabs here and there. The middle third is where they begin to fill the map, and the last third is where big collisions can happen. If we take a look at our power block, yes, the USA has just picked up Persia, which is right in between the Ottoman, Russian, and British power blocks. We can't be good neighbors with all of them, especially given the conflict between the Ottomans and the Russians and the British and the Russians. I think I see where this is going because we have an anti-Russian society. So, with our interests now running up into those of other nations, we have got to have an ability to project strength. Looking at what we have here, 43 in our naval strength and 46 battalions plus some conscripts, we are at a certain level. Let's compare that with the rest of the world, shall we? First of all, we'll just take a look at prestige. We're at 1892, United Kingdom is at 2501. If we look at our prestige, we're getting 64 from Army projection and 210 from Navy, 274 total from our military power, which means all of our other prestige, 1,600 other points, are coming from other sources. If we look at the British and their breakdown, they've got 386 from Army, that's more than our total, and 2,000 from Naval projection. What? That's actually almost more than their total prestige. They're they're dealing with some modifiers and some other things here, but good golly, Miss Molly, their entire prestige is pretty much based on their military strength. And if we look at that military strength, United Kingdom is a nation that has to mix it up with the rest of the world. 500 boats and 351 battalions, plus more conscripts than we have. Oh, wow. If we're going to be a good ally to the British, we need to step up our game as far as military spending goes. Oh, I wonder where I've heard that before. At any rate, the situation we have to take care of here is expanding our military. Now, it's not just for prestige. It's because we can be called into conflicts with other countries, or they may decide to come at us. And they may come at us in sufficient numbers that if we call upon the most powerful nation in the world, the British, to come to our aid, they could actually be, well, able to overwhelm the British and us as well. Let's take a look at military here and sort by battalions. Oh, wow. So here we are. Let's say Russia, Germany, and I won't include China, but we could, because Russia and China are kind of close together. If they all decided to have a war with England and they called upon us to help them out, we wouldn't be much help. We'd be less help than Canada or Korea or Bolivia or Mexico. We have a smaller army than Mexico. Good thing Mexico is now one of our trade bloc members. We need to do something about that. In fact, looking at Mexico's power, they're at 2632 with their military. Ours is 1712. Oh my. We are way behind. Looking at navies, well, we're not that far off. We're down here, but it's still Italy, France, Spain, Ottoman, Germans, Netherlands. Navally speaking, No, the British could shut them down. But if it's Italy and the French coming up against us, they could give us a lot of trouble. And if we don't get the British on our side, any one of these nations would be able to overwhelm the American capability to defend. Now, that's not entirely honest and fair. I could raise lots of conscripts, but right now I'm not looking to do that. I've just got these 127 associated with existing units, and that's that. So to build up my military capability, to build up that number there, I've got to recruit more troops. I've got to assign more conscripts to my forces, so that way when we go into a big war, we're able to not just have the standing army battalions, but then the conscript battalions come in as well and be able to project force that way. And we've got to build out that navy. The other benefit we get from building a navy is that if we build it big enough, we're going to get more interest that we can declare globally. I'd like to see that. Now, some mods will impact with that, be that as it may, but still having more navy means more interests, and that's a good thing overall. What am I going to do with these guys? Well, let's take a look first at our buildings, and I'm going to go to the arms, artillery, munitions, and I'll stop subsidizing the munitions for right now. We're in the white area on arms, red on artillery, kind of green on munitions. Okay, so we're making enough ammo. We could make more. But definitely having more military means we're going to have more demand in these areas, especially if I make more artillery, and I'll word on that in a minute. But we've got a good enough group to start with. And I think that if they become profitable as I'm building out my military, which is really going to dominate my production queue, it's empty right now, but it's going to get full up with military things. But as I was saying, if they become more profitable, then things like additional shipyards and military buildings and those goods producing buildings, private industry is going to invest in those so they can sell to the government here. And yeah, military shipyards is like, wow, we don't have enough to keep them busy. So what do we need to do to keep them busy? All right, I'm glad you asked. Let's start with the Navy, because that's where you should start with your military buildup. The reason being that as you add more ships, you are going, they take longer to fill out. You could build the naval base, but then getting it staffed and fully ramped up takes much longer than the same, than an army base. So if I built my ground forces out first and then the Navy, we could potentially be in a war that starts soon we'd have our army ready, but our Navy not. Whereas if we build the Navy first, that could be ready at the same time that the Army is ready for a potential future conflict. And we have to be thinking about those because we are in that mid-game where we're going to see an increasing amount of conflict between great powers. And being a great power, we are going to be expected to be part of those conflicts. As it is, we've even had to upgrade our boats. And I know in the base game you can't upgrade monitors to torpedo boats. I'm fudging that with my mod here. But I promise, Scout's honor, I'm not going to upgrade torpedo boats to scout cruisers or destroyers, and I'm not going to upgrade ironclads to dreadnoughts or battleships. I'll have to scrap these and rebuild. That's the way the game wants us to go, although I really disagree with that. I think it should be something more like in Victoria 2, where you could build out individual vessels, and then if you're over your support limit, you start to cull them. We should be able to say, let's build the Navy on top of this one and then pull back instead of having to scrap it and then build new. Oh well. Anyway, I'm going to build out more Navy here. What kind of things do I want to see in each Navy? Well, I want more than 20 ships, which is what I have here. 15 light and 5 heavy. I want to see my navies have a much higher percentage of the heavy ships. I like to have a buffer of light ships because I've had experiences before where if they've been equal, say like 50 light ships and 50 heavy ships, and then something happens and we go down to 49 light ships, suddenly we have one ship too many and we begin taking hits on our organization. Now, obviously, it's not as bad as if we have like 2 light ships and 50 heavy ships, but it's still just that little thing, and I don't want to see that happen. I'd like to have a little buffer. So I'm looking at building out, say they've got 20 ships right here. I want to add 90 more to this fleet and 90 more to the other, to the first Navy, and get 4 very large fleets of about 110 ships each. 60 light ships, 50 heavy ships. What is that going to bring to me? Well, if I hover over here, I can see their capabilities. The heavy ships are big on offense and defense, not so good on commerce rating, but okay, whatever. 50-50 for the ironclads. And that is way more than the man of wars, which are 25-25. If I go to dreadnoughts, that's 80-80. Battleships is 100-100. So yeah, I definitely would, once we get to dreadnoughts, I'd like to look into getting some of those because they're really nice. And battleships are good too, but there's not as big a jump as between man of wars to ironclads or ironclads to dreadnoughts. When we look at the light ships, my torpedo boats, 40 on offense, 30 on defense. These are the ones that go after and do the convoy raiding. And having a bunch of them, yeah, I'll be able to rip into another fleet. Even if I have a lot of ironclads, these guys will be able to tear up another navy. And the ironclads are there to help defend the commerce raiders. They're doing fine. And again, compare them to monitors, 20-30, frigates, 10-15. Oh my, that's why you want to go from frigates to monitors as soon as you can. Destroyers, they're going to come at a different path here because you get the torpedo boats through Jeune École, and I actually like them better than the destroyers because their destroyers are 30-40, and they're for escorting the convoys. Torpedo boats are 40-30, and for convoy raiding. Once we get to scout cruisers, though, 50-50, as tough as an ironclad, but they're really good at convoy defense. So again, when I get to that, I'd like to build them out there. But both the scout cruisers and the dreadnoughts are going to require radio. So that's going to be for later mid-game, early late game. I need to work on my Iron Navy right now. Okay, so we're going to build out with torpedo boats and ironclads, lots of them. And yeah, I talked about building a huge fleet. When we look at what we can do in America, I want to look at peasants and sort by peasants, because this is going to tell me how many guys do I have that I can fill my sailor slots with. If I look at job seekers overall, it looks like, oh, hey, we got plenty for everyone, but nah, they may be seeking a job somewhere else, not necessarily on your boat or your military force. So you want to go with areas that obviously have the large number of peasants. Those guys are most willing to sign on for a tour of duty and be part of your thing there. And I can get 40 to 50 per territory here. I can fill out maybe the top 10, 11 of these. And I think down to Florida is where I'll aim for. New Jersey, I may get into some of that there. And that'll get me a fleet. You know, it may not be exactly 500 like the British, but I can get close to it. And I'll start building them right away. But before I start building them, since I'm going to do a lot of base building in these areas, I want to make sure that each one of these states that I'm able to build in has got a good amount of construction in it. To me, I like having a spread across my country of like each state having at least one. But in the ones that I'm going to do a heavy building program, that's where I expand my capacity to 5 or 10 or 15 or something like that. I don't max out per each state because with the mods I'm playing, that can lead me into trouble. I'll max out eventually, maybe. But right now, having just a lot of construction capacity spread across the nation, it's fine with me. It's fine with me. You may choose to play differently. But I still want to make sure I have that construction capacity. So what I may do is I'll just click through all of these and just add ships as needed per fleet, and then come back and hold down Alt and click to add new construction capacity at the beginning of the queue. So that'll all build out, and then we'll be able to start looking at the ships that we're building. To add the ships, again, if we look back here, it's just a simple matter of clicking the plus, and then holding, I can either click this plus here once per ship, or hold down shift to get 5, or hold down control to get 10, and away we go. This is what I'm going to do. When I want to add another fleet, I'll click here, go to Navy, and do create fleet, and go about that. Where do I want to create fleets? Well, I want to have a balance. I certainly want to have, I've got already 2 large fleets on the East Coast. I want 2 large fleets on the West Coast. And that's all going to be before I dig a canal, say in Panama. Historically, by the way, Nicaragua was considered a possible route, as was the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. But for various reasons, Panama was chosen as the ideal site, and that's why there's a canal in Panama and not Nicaragua or Tehuantepec. But the USA also wanted to make sure that no other country built those routes, so it would negotiate, particularly with Nicaragua, would negotiate to make sure that no one else had canal rights, that the U.S. had them but did not exercise them, and that the U.S. had canal rights in Panama and did exercise them. There's another side to the Panama Canal thing, that famously the United States caused Panama to rebel from Colombia and become its own nation. And then Colombia got very upset about that, and there's other things that happened. The USA paid an indemnity to Colombia that was actually more than the amount Colombia asked for the U.S. to build a canal. And the U.S. was outraged and said, we're not going to pay that. We're going to make a new nation. So had the U.S. actually paid the amount the Colombians asked, it would have had the canal just the same, and it would have also had better relations with all of Latin America. Just a side note. Be nice when you're building canals. Don't just take them. Come on. Anyway, but having that canal would allow fleets from one coast to easily reach the other without having to go around Cape Horn here. But until then, we are looking at we have to make a 2-ocean navy, Pacific and Atlantic. And I want big fleets on both, so that way, should we have to respond one way or the other, we could do so quickly. We might have to, let's say there's a war with Russia, we would need the capability to blockade in the Baltic and the Black Sea, and then also on their ports here in Asia. And if China is their ally, we'd have to line up with that there. Blockade the Chinese. And why do I keep mentioning that? Well, if I look at diplomacy, they are an ally of Russia. And this is something that's been bugging me here. Looking at other countries here, like Germany, they don't have allies. Okay, fine, whatever. But they do have a defensive group pact with Russia. Stuff can go down here, and I'm starting to see alliances forming. At any rate, we need to be able to project on 2 oceans. So I also want to have navies that are small enough to deal with small conflicts. Like 10, 20 boats, and they would be able to take a small army of 10 to 20 battalions and deal with something like if there's a rebellion in Venezuela and the rebel force is very small, but I'm called in as an ally of theirs. Send in a small force, do a small invasion if needed. I don't want to have to always mobilize the big fleet for a little war. So that'll take care of my fleet situation. Several large fleets and some small ones. And we'll see all this once I get to the actual build out. For the military, we've got a tricky situation in the USA because we've got national militia. We can't build 50 or 60 or whatever regular battalions in a state. Like all the other ones that have professional army, if you have a state with 484 peasants, by golly, you can build a lot of barracks there. We get 5 for standing army in each state, regardless of size. We will be hard pressed to get up to 200 or 220 battalions. We're going to be filling out almost all of these. So that means the strength of the U.S. force will have to rely upon conscripts. So what are we going to look at with there? Well, let's take a look at Army of the Republic here. I've already got 23 infantry, and we have no artillery in the country, which is probably why those artillery factories aren't doing so well. In the early game, having all infantry or infantry with a chunk of cavalry was fine. But when we get to the mid game, and definitely in the late game, you want it to be where there's almost parity with infantry and artillery and a very small amount of cavalry. And even then, you can get by without it. When we look at the forces, a cavalry force is going to give us more offense than defense. That's nice. And they give us better battle occupation. So the more cavalry you have when you win a battle, the bigger the move you make. Okay. And when we have early units, these lancers, which is what we have in 1836, 30 and 20 is pretty good against, let's say, line infantry, 20 and 25. The lancers will wipe them out there. But when we look at skirmish infantry, 25-35, they've got the skirmish infantry has a bit of an edge on lancer cavalry. And when we look at artillery, well, starting with mobile artillery, 30 offense, 15 defense. Okay, it's about the same as the lancers, 30-20. But these guys are less on defense and they slow you down, but they have a much higher kill rate, and that's where artillery comes into its own. And when we look at shrapnel artillery, that kill rate is now at 30%, offense is 45, defense is 25. This is where artillery becomes the god of war, as the Russian army calls it. This is where it gets really big. And if we look ahead to siege artillery, remember, we need radio for that, so that's going to be around the 1900s. 55 offense, 30 defense, 25% kill rate. Oh my gosh. That is ferocious. And if we look at trench infantry, 30-40, and squad infantry, where you need radios, 40-50, these guys have made your lancers obsolete. Now, again, when I build out my army, I want to have where, say, just over half of my force is infantry. Again, I want to have a little buffer there. In case I lose a few battalions of infantry, I don't want suddenly an alert to come up because I have bad organization. So let's say I'm considering one makeup would be 60 infantry battalions, 50 artillery, and 5 cavalry. The cavalry is a very small part of the total unit. The infantry and artillery are making up the majority of it, and that much artillery, yeah, it'll be slow, but oh my gosh, once it gets engaged, bam, 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 it'll knock things out. Now that's a big army. I don't think I can build that with my regular forces, especially since I want to have a number of smaller forces, like I call them divisions. 8 infantry, 2 cavalry, that's it. That's all I need for very small conflicts with, let's say, a Native American tribe or intervention in a small conflict. A small unit is all I need. And these will go with the small fleets. The bigger armies go with the bigger fleets. And what I'm going to have to do is consider filling these out with additional conscripts. Now, this one's already got 80 more conscripts. Good job. And if we take a look there, it's hard to see, but I've got some states where I can get up to 100, or Ohio 77, Virginia 60, squint hard, you see Tennessee's got 55. I can get loads of conscripts. I just have to pay the price when we start mobilizing them. But I can get some huge units that way, and that's what I'm going to have to do to make up for the fact that Britain and Russia and Germany have got these monster armies, and I'm not going to be able to build to be that big. So I'm going to create some large armies, or the core of a large army, and then have conscripts, both artillery and infantry, that will be added on to it. I'm not going to do the same I'm not going to make any conscript cavalry. This is not the time for that. This is the time for grinding the enemy's forces down, destroying them on the field, having my navies blockade, and winning the war that way. So yeah, I'm going to build out some large armies, and hopefully I'll also have an army that I can keep around, maybe one on each coast if I can, that'll be acting as a sort of a marine force that I could use for naval invasions. The naval invasions in Victoria 3 are a bit broken. They allow you to get away with a lot more than could be done historically, but I take advantage of them because the combat system is also a little more cerebral, shall we say. So I consider a large invasion force not to be everything hitting all at once, but rather what would arrive and quickly flesh out that area and then act as an army in the field. I'm fudging there. I'm fudging. So I'm going to get my production line started, and let's take a look at what that looks like. So this is a little bit later than the previous one, and you can see I've incorporated Oklahoma. And I've already started building that additional construction capacity, and we've got another, 564 in the queue beyond what we're building. Well, we got everything on page 1, and most of the stuff on page 2 being built, which is good. We've got 49 more pages to total. I'm not going to go through all of them. Well, we're already building some Navy yards, and once we get through building all of the construction, the Navy stuff is going to go that much faster. The 564, let's talk about how much of each I was able to build. Go to development is where we go. And I've got 156 more barracks is what I was able to crank out. Yay! That means 156 on top of the 49. I am going to be just over 200. 215 is where we're going to be for our total troops. And this is scraping it close. I click say a plus here. I could build, if I sort by the peasantry, yeah. I'm down to where I've barely got enough people to fill out the jobs. I could get a few more. I can't get many more battalions. Not this way. I really want to pass mass conscription. However, there's a problem with that. If I go to my laws, national militia, mass conscription, not only do I have to wait 10 more months before I can make another attempt, but we've only got the armed forces that want to endorse it. And both the armed forces and landowners are marginalized. Everybody else in government is, and some who are not in government are against the thing. So I don't know what's going to happen to jar that out. And historically, the USA has been very married to the idea of a small standing army. And in time of conflict, the conscripts will arrive. The volunteers will be there. Well, that caught them flat-footed in the Mexican War when the volunteers left after their 90-day period ended. Some of them, like they were in Mexico, marching on Mexico City, and they said, "No, that's it. We're going home. Our 90 days are up." And in the Civil War, they had to extend the enlistment period for conscripts, and then eventually convert over to actual drafting people, telling them, "You are going to join the army. You are now volunteered. You're voluntold to be in the army," which led to troubles. World War I was a similar situation. We thought that people would be patriotic enough to sign up and swell the ranks. That didn't happen, so a draft happened. But yeah, whatever. I'll make it work. I've got these armies here. They can have up to 140 in there. We're going to recruit, let's see here, 30 plus 20 plus 5. So that'll be about 55 battalions in these larger armies here. Army of the Republic, South Pacific. Each of these are going to be 55. I've got these other divisions. I'll have 10 each in them. So just waiting for them to come around. And that'll be that. For my fleets, yeah, these are big boys here. These are, I've got the Mobile fleet, not mobile as in moving around, but Mobile, Alabama fleet is where it's based. The Austin fleet, San Diego fleet, Seattle fleet, all of these will be 110 ships, 60 torpedo boats, and 50 ironclads. So there'll be big ones there. And then I've got my Galveston and Norfolk squadrons, which are going to be about 10 per group there. And we need to put a guy in charge at Norfolk here. I'll go with a good dockyard organizer here who's meticulous. and we'll put him in charge. So I've got my big fleets, my small fleets, my big armies, my small armies. All this is ready to go. And as you can see, we got a lot in the queue. So what's going to happen is, as we go along, I am not going to build nothing but these. If I go back to my view here, we're short on steel. So I'm going to need to import some more steel and likely also put a few steel foundries at the head of this queue, because we're going to need the steel to make other stuff that's, like the boats and the cannon. So I'm going to have to insert things at the top end of the queue in order to build the rest of it. But it's still a very large thing. And if we take a look at how long they project to build, right now it's at 14 months. But yeah, with the other stuff I'll have to throw in as well, it could go out to 2.5 years. My hope is that I can get all this built out before there's a major conflict in which I'm called on to participate. So let's take a look and see what happens. Well, we're building things out here. We had to build out some more steel and glass industry, and you can also build out some railways and government administration. And now we've got this conflict here, a diplomatic play in Arabia. The Russians are wanting to pick up a bit of Indonesia and Najd, and they want to humiliate the UK and France. And who should be knocking on my door but a very uncertain England, saying they're calling us in as an ally and we get to put in a war goal. If we break with them, we break our defensive pact. We're not doing that. We're going in, and this is where we're now committed to that foreign conflict. What do we want for our war goal? I'm not really worried about transferring subjects from the Baltics, revoking claims. I'd like to conquer a state. And one that we'd like to do would be Primorye. Why Primorye? This is, consider it USA's entry into Asia. The Pacific has always had a greater draw for American expansionist ideas than the Atlantic. The Atlantic is looking back on Europe. It's already built out. It's already taken over. The Pacific Rim, it's seen as a land of opportunity because I guess the armies there are smaller. But yeah, this would be a good one to pick up because it's got good resources there, and it's got Russia's warm water port out this way. The guys over here in the Amur estuary are going to be frozen over in the winter. This Vladivostok, this will become a good port to have, and a good port to keep the Russians from having. And if the Americans can establish a base here, then connections with China and Japan, why, we'll be good neighbors with them, I'm sure. Let's demand Primorye. Now, this means we'll have to do a naval invasion. I'm aware of that. This also means we've got to build out that army, and it's going to be another 14 weeks before it's all done. But we're building our barracks and things like that. We've already gone through, come back around here. Yeah, we've already built all the naval bases. So looking at our fleet situation, San Diego fleet is almost ready to go. Boston fleet is about halfway there. Same on the other. So definitely the San Diego fleet is one that we could use for invasion. And then we just need to pick up one of these other land units here that we're building out on, and we'll be able to invade Primorye. We'll see what happens. Oh, wow. After I said that, China is on Russia's side. You thought I was paranoid about that. Well, I'm not. Yeah. But the good news is we don't have to fight China directly because it's China that joined, not Korea or Manchuria. Just China. So as long as we keep our fight over here, if we do an invasion and then defend it, we'll hold our goal, and we won't have to go any further than that. That will be something to do. So we don't have to fight the Chinese army, which with the mods I've got here is way too beefy. Way too beefy here. 600 battalions, and it's not bankrupt. And if we take a look at the actual armies here, we'll take a look at bordered red banner here. Skirmish infantry, Nah. This is too much for China in 1880. They should be not so good. But anyway, next time I do a playthrough, I'm going to eschew some of the mods that gave me Super China, even though it means I have fewer benefits elsewhere. But I digress. Let me go back to building and I'll come right back. Okay, we got everything built out. We're just started with this war with Russia here, and China is also on for the ride. We can see that the French and British are attempting naval invasions. Oh, and the Dutch are involved too. We might as well get a piece of the action. And if we look down here, 1394 enemy convoy sunk in the Baltic Sea. Yeah. So our guys are really ripping into the Russian forces. Our fleets are increasing in strength. We have just finished building all the barracks out. We are still waiting for these guys to populate, but I think I can do an invasion with them because, one, we'll do the invasion with the base force, and then once they land, that's when I'm going to activate the conscripts. Oh, it looks like we need one more here to balance it out. Yeah, somehow it dropped off there. Anyway, well, there we go. So yeah, once we land, we'll activate conscripts, and then we'll get 300 battalions there, and we'll hold our part in the east. The rest of the goals here that we have here, it's pretty straightforward. We just want to... Primorier is the only goal we have against Russia. The treaty port here for Charleroi, that's on the British. And then everything else, the Russians have to do their invasion. And what? They want to transfer Guatemala and Liberia? How dare they? How dare they? How dare they try to intervene with American processes? We're here for democracy, not for autocracy. Back in my day, when I was your age, I was much older. Now, how dare they? And this actually was the argument I made there, like we are for democracy, they are for autocracy. It actually resonated very strongly with any nation that was in a conflict with the United States, because so many people from other countries had migrated to the U.S., with the exception of France. But everyone else, the USA was kind of like a safety valve for all of their people that were dissatisfied with things back home. They could just ship them off to the USA, and then they wouldn't have to deal with radicals at home. But the problem was, those guys were very radically opposed to the government that they had left, and if they were at war, the USA could actually exploit some of those connections and say, why don't you write back to the folks at home and then tell them how terrible things are over there and how great things are here and how they could maybe start a revolution against their... I don't know. This could happen. This could happen. And so, yes, we're going to definitely play the democracy card, even though not everybody in the USA can vote. Just... everybody who counts can vote. And who counts? Why, the men who are white and have access to property and things like that. Even though we do have universal male suffrage, it tends to favor... voting still tend to be favored towards wealthier groups. But I digress. We still technically have democracy, which is... we have more democracy than the Russians do. They're being led by an autocrat. But at any rate, we're going to wear down the Russians. We've built out our army. And in the next episode... we'll do a little naval invasion. So we'll catch you on the flippity flip. Hope all your diplomatic plays go out the way you want. Ta-ta and farewell.